This is Western Japan. This is Eastern Japan. Maybe a topographical map will be better. Western Japan, Eastern Japan. Divided by mountains, getting between the two historically posed a difficulty. For most of history, the capital of Japan was in the west. At times, this led to weak control of Eastern Japan, and it could be called the Wild Wild East at times. From the east, bandits, rebels, and future shoguns hailed. One of the oldest and most direct ways between Eastern and Western Japan was by land, and it forces you to go through Hakone.
This was once one of the most important roads in Japan. Due to Japan's mountainous geography, it sort of naturally forces people to travel through certain points. And to going east-west, you're kind of forced to go through what is now Hakone. And so there's been a road here basically forever. During the Edo period, the Tokugawa Shogunate exercised strict control over travel. And this was part of it. This is a checkpoint that they built here in Hakone to be able to control the flow of traffic towards Edo. So it was part of their security apparatus, along with, taxation and controlling the movement of goods. The road connected Kyoto and Edo, with Kyoto being the official capital, and during the Edo period, Edo being the de facto capital, it gained even more importance, connecting Eastern and Western Japan.
The stones are uneven, so it's actually interesting. They have a little display here where they talk about the process where they would put the stones first, and then they would put lye on top of the stones, and then they would cut the wood to fit the stones. The lye would form a barrier between the wood and the stones.
There's the old-time bathroom. So in here, this is kind of the living quarters of the officials and staff at Hakone checkpoint. There's where they bathe. You can see in here they have an Iori. So he depicts a Banshi, which would be an official. And he is a Chuven, who would basically be their support staff. In here, this is where you can kind of think of it a little bit as a mudroom, hence the floor is not as nice. This is where they would cook. This is where they would store their hats, umbrellas, raincoats, things like that. So these were female officials here that their job was to inspect women that were traveling along the route. So one of the things that happened during the Tokugawa Shogunate is that in particular the noble women, the women related to the daimyos and other high-ranking officials outside of the imperial court, the shogunate actually had a lot of control on their movement and forbid them from going certain places, so they needed permission to leave Edo. This guy here, the Joe Banin, he actually lives in the area, and this was basically a generation to generation role. So they kind of provide a, I don't know, there's a word I'm looking for. I can't remember it. Basically, they provide a long memory because, he's worked this position all of his life. He learned it from his father, who worked this position all of his life. He'll teach it to his son, who's worked this position all of his life. Compared to, someone like the Banshi, who are assigned by the shogun here. These guys, they come, they do their term of service, then maybe they get reassigned somewhere else. There's the Bangashiya, so he's the highest ranking person here. He is from the Odawa domain. And there is the Yokon, who is basically his assistant right-hand man. They got bows, they got guns, you see spears, swords. These weapons are in part to remind everybody passing through the checkpoint who's in charge. Here is the prison cell. It's right next to the soldiers' quarters. Big, thick wood. So people that, smugglers, people that tried to sneak past the checkpoint, they would be held here. Here is the soldiers' quarters. You can see weapons up on the wall. That guy's really happy. Here they are eating around. So that one there, they call the interrogation room. That's where they would question people, check their documents. That is basically highest ranking drawing room, where the commanders would be, where they'd have reception for important people coming through. So this here is the doma. You notice the floor is not wood. This is where they were cooking, they would store their goods, particularly things that would get dirty. And these were also the weapons used for capturing criminals. So these weren't to kill people, they were to, the spikes are to snag their clothes, get them basically tied up and caught up, and then apprehended. See him cooking there. And then we can also see cooking here with the uori. So these guys would be ashigaru. So these are not samurai ranked soldiers. They were responsible for most of the guard duty, and most of the samurais were more of the bureaucratic jobs. Here we can see the well that they would use, spring water from the mountains. Here's the bathroom that the foot soldiers used. And then, obviously, the railings are not original. So from this point on, these are the original stones. The guards would have to regularly take these stairs to get up to the watchtower. It's a little windy. The audio is probably really bad. So it seems like this would be an easy place to bypass, but they actually built this fence here. And the fence went about 61 meters into the lake, and then up towards Mount Bilbo about 400 meters. So it would create a very difficult to pass wall, and the geography kind of helps them because there's a lake on one side and there's steep mountains on the other. So if you wanted to get around it, you either had to go out into the lake, swim, boat. I bet they'd spot the boat pretty quickly unless you did it at night, or you'd have to go through the mountains. This, of course, was a case of no defense is perfect, but it was pretty good. It was very good at stopping armies. A small group of people, one person, yeah, okay, cool, they could maybe smuggle through, and I'm sure people did, but you weren't sneaking an army through here very easily. And that's also why troops were deployed up here to Lake Ashi in the Hakone area many times during war. Kind of cool picture. Nice clear day here. You can see the rim of Hakone crater. You can see Mount Fuji. Yeah, not today. This is the lookout tower. I'm imagining that many of these trees that are obstructing the view now were not here during the Edo period, and the vegetation was actively kept down so they could see better. So this, oh, my umbrella's breaking. Oh, so this was where their shooting range was. You can still walk parts of the Tokaido here. It's preserved, some of it. So that's actually what I'm gonna do.
We generally call this the Tokaido now. To keep things simple, we will call it the Tokaido. We won't talk about any other names in this video. And we're not going to delve into the fact that Tokaido was also a geographic region in ancient Japan. The geography of Hakone forces travelers to use one of Mount Hakone's mountain passes. These narrow passes act as natural bottlenecks that could be controlled and regulated to control trade, people, and armies moving between eastern and western Japan. The strategic importance of Hakone was recognized quickly, with the first permanent checkpoint being set up in 899. In some ways, the route is too old to really say when it started. We do know that the earliest main route seemed to use Ashigara Pass. Pottery fragments from as far back as the Jomon period have been found in the pass, and we know that by the Nara period it was commonly used. Located on the north slope of the mountains created by Mount Hakone, a checkpoint was built in 899. Ashigara Pass would be the site of the Battle of Hakone Ikenoshita in 1336. At first, the steeper but more direct route through Hakone Pass was less used. In 802, an eruption of Mount Fuji forced the closing of Ashigara Pass, and traffic moved to the route that used the Hakone Pass for a year before returning to Ashigara Pass. During the Kamakura Shogunate, the main route shifted south to use Hakone Pass. This is the route that we usually think about when we think of the Tokaido and can be seen in the 53 stations of the Tokaido by Hiroshige. The Kamakura Shogunate considered Hakone and Ashigara Pass defensive points. They defined Kanto, it's not a region just made up for Pokemon, it's a real thing, as the area east of Ashigara and Hakone Pass. During the Jokyo War, the Hojo clan stationed troops in Hakone along the Tokaido as one of the three prongs of their invasion of western Japan advanced along the Tokaido. In the Edo period, the route followed the same basic path as the Kamakura Tokaido, with a few variations. The barrier was moved closer to the shore of Lake Ashi. The original intent was to have the Shakuba on the Edo side of the barrier closer to Hakone Shrine. However, the locals in the prosperous temple town were not cooperative and refused to build a dungeon for officials to stay at. A new town was quickly built on the Kyoto side of the border to be Hakone Juko. Families from the nearby post towns of Odawara and Mishima were moved to the new post town. The post town had a unique structure in that it was part of the Odawara domain, like Hakone Barrier, and part of the Mishima magistrates' territories, making it the only Chukoba under the control of two lords on paper. At 725 meters above sea level, it was the highest Chukoba on the Tokaido, and Hakone Pass is the highest section of the Tokaido. This in turn made the post town an unattractive place to live, as it lacked fields and had harsh winters. Money from travelers and subsidies by the shogunate were the only source of livelihood for the people in Hakone Juko. Checkpoints issued levies on goods, but their primary purpose was security. Along with looking for general suspicious activities, barriers controlled the flow of weapons into Edo and women out of Edo. Weapons and women. Now that is how you control a society. The point of barriers was to control the entering guns and leaving women. Part of how the Tokugawas controlled the nation's lords was having their wives and families live in Edo as hostages, basically, and rarely, if ever, allowing them to leave.
I am quite literally walking in the footsteps of history. I'm just glad I'm wearing my hiking boots, not my trainers.
Hakone Checkpoint had female staff called Hitome, whose job was to inspect women travelers and make sure they were who they say they were, checking their travel documents. They had male staff that were checking men to make sure that they weren't cross-dressers.
So this diagram actually shows how the construction was done of these cobblestone paths. So you had the top stones, which are the ones that we're walking on. They are next to each other on the surface, and then tightly packed pebbles and soil are underneath to try to keep them in place. This is where the water can escape. And then even the trees on the side, cedars and pines, you can see them right there, were also man-planted and built up in these humps with also large rocks inside to keep the road safe as possible.
Hakone Barrier focused on women leaving Edo. They weren't as focused on weapons going in. Most of the weapons checking on the Tokaido happened at the Ari barrier. In addition to the main checkpoint, there were 5 sub-checkpoints built in the Hakone area to screen travelers going on the side roads.
Back when this road was actively used, there were multiple places like this to stop and get refreshments, tea, something to drink. This is the only one that's left. We did it. We did it. I'm standing on what was once one of the most important and most traveled roads in Japan. The Tokaido connected the imperial capital of Kyoto and the shogun's capital of Edo, now Tokyo. Here in Hakone, the road is hemmed in by a lake and by mountains, turning it into what the Tokugawa saw as a natural fortress to protect Edo from forces from the west.